On September 11th, 1988, the world lost a vibrant, outgoing, cool, and spunky little girl. These are all terms used by Melissa Ann Tremblay's friends to describe her. It was clear that in her 11 short years, she impacted many lives. She had big dreams, and she's missed dearly. Our thoughts, prayers, and well wishes go out to her friends and family as we get into the discussion on the updates about her case. In episode 5 yesterday, we re-released our overview we had previously done on Melissa's murder in season 4. We did this to reacclimate you all as we go over her new case updates. So let's get into it.
Welcome to Invisible Tears. I'm Jane. I'm here today with Amanda and Drew. Today we're going to cover Melissa Ann Tremblay's case again. We covered her back in
season 4, episode 18, back in April of 2024.
Thank you.
Of course.
Melissa was the 11-year-old girl who was found murdered September of 1988 in Lawrence, Mass. 74-year-old Marvin Skip McClendon was arrested and charged on April 26, 2022. His first trial ended in a mistrial. Jury could not decide. They could not come to an unanimous decision.
Yep.
This past November of 2024, he was retried. So we're going to do some update and let you guys know how that trial came out. So Amanda, you have all kinds of information on this.
I most certainly do. And the reason why I have all sorts of information on this is because of the fantastic work that Kristen Seavey does on Murder, She Told. She is absolutely amazing. And I know that we have definitely referenced her and plugged her before. If you all don't know about Murder, She Told and Kristen Seavey, please go follow her, go subscribe, do yourself a favor. She is an extremely compassionate and empathetic investigative journalist. And she actually released 2 episodes just at the beginning of this year. The first episode was entitled Melissa Tremblay, The Investigation New. And that was released on January 28th of 2025. And then the follow-up, or the part 2 episode, was Melissa Tremblay, The Trials of Marvin McClendon, and that was actually released on February 11th of 2025. And so after listening to these episodes that Kristen compiled, she was actually even able to get courtroom audio, which was insane. I was like, wow.
And it's not even available now.
It's
not available anymore. That was crazy.
Yep. And so basically what she was doing was she was trying to make sure that we understood in full, like, more about the case, more about what happened, and why the second trial actually ended up ending the way that it did. So there was a huge piece in both the trials where the prosecutor was really, really focused on DNA and the DNA of Marvin McClendon. Now, we have to have a little bit of a conversation about the difference in DNA when it's obtained. So, if law enforcement obtains a 13 STR DNA profile, that is a full DNA profile that can be used to solely identify a singular person. That is undeniable evidence, points to one person. But in cases where a DNA profile where it's only partial, so it's actually called a YSTR profile, it's partial. And what that does is that actually tells you all the men who share a common male ancestor. That is actually what was obtained in Melissa's case. And interestingly enough, there were actually 2 different YSTR male DNA profiles that were obtained in her case. For some reason, prosecutors only focused on one. So what actually ended up occurring was prosecutors. So Marvin McClendon, he was one of 24 other people with the McClendon last name that could have been a positive, that could have been a match to the DNA that was actually found on Melissa, the DNA profile that was underneath her fingernails. However, because it was only a partial DNA match, he was actually one of technically 155 matches that were found. Did I explain that right? Or was that confusing? Okay,
No,
cool.
no.
Cool. So basically, what Marvin's defense honed in on was law enforcement and investigators only focused on the McClendon family, when in fact there were 86 additional other surnames that matched this YSTR profile. Different last names that were like Lewis, Richardson, Brown, O'Brien. There was a slew of names. They honed
McLaughlin.
in. McLaughlin was one of them. Yeah. We heard that and we were like, oh, wow.
Oh,
I know. But so what Marvin's defense team really did was they honed in on this piece of DNA evidence. So it's funny because I never knew the differences in DNA evidence before actually hearing all about this and hearing what occurred.
yeah, neither have I. I thought DNA was DNA. I didn't realize there was that much into it.
Yep.
Now, I do know that 99.9% of DNA that is found is exact when looking at every human. It's that 0.1% that differentiates every single human being. But you can only identify that 0.1% if you have a full profile in the DNA sample that they gave. So in this case, I believe it was only partial. So if you were to think of like a DNA strain, literally as like a chain link fence, right in the center is that 0.1%. Well, they only got a partial portion of it. So I think that's what caused them to go with the profile that just identified that it was male, Irish, Scottish descent, and that's where they were able to focus on.
Yep. And also in the second trial, there were some pieces that weren't able to be included that were originally included in the first trial, mainly the discussion surrounding his van. That was actually excluded for whatever reason. The prosecutors could not bring up any of the evidence related to that. Basically, Marvin's defense really hammered in, you have to be sure beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the law. They really honed in on that, and they honed in on what prosecutors failed. They painted prosecutors as people that found a name and made the pieces fit, as opposed to letting the evidence lead to someone. Now, some of the other points that were actually found, like within the case, that's kind of important to note too, are there were strands of hair that were found on Melissa that did not belong to Melissa, that have never been tested. There was that second DNA profile that was actually found on her shirt that nobody ever tried to match to anybody. There was plaster casts of tire tracks that were found near her that never were tested or brought into evidence of any sort. There was also a photograph that was taken of a foot mark on her back that no work ever happened with. So there's all these other pieces where, don't get me wrong, I understand that the prosecutors are saying that all the evidence is pointing to him. I get it. So that's what they zoned in on. That's what they did. That's why they, tried him. But there are other pieces that come into play that the defense was able to bring up, saying, well, what about this? What about this? Basically bringing up reasonable doubt. And so, unfortunately, Marvin McClendon was actually found not guilty of the murder of Melissa Tremblay. Now, even though we're explaining why, certainly not necessarily saying yes or no with whatever we agree. We're just bringing up the pieces as to why we believe that the jury actually did find him not guilty. Like, these are the factors that went into trying the case. All of her family and her childhood friends fully believe that he is the one that's responsible for murdering her.
Yeah. I believe the defense did a wonderful job with reasonable doubt.
Yes.
I also believe that the prosecution did not do their job fully.
Yeah.
They could have done a better job.
Mm-hmm.
My opinion, I do think that he's guilty. From everything that I've seen, obviously we've seen more than what the jury was able to see or was able to, use with their decisions. But yeah, I mean, he pretty much got away with murder.
Mm.
My
Yeah.
opinion.
I mean, a couple of pieces to point out too was like his mannerisms and the way that he reacted when people started zoning in on him. When law enforcement actually showed up to his home where he was living in Alabama, they had police cam video of him literally saying, once they announced themselves, him literally saying, "Is this about a rape?" Now, mind you, in Melissa's case, there was no sexual assault. There was no evidence of a rape. Her clothes were, the medical examiner fully discounted that she was not assaulted in that way at all. The only odd indicator was a singular sperm on her pant leg that they found during the investigation.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. And now back to our episode.
And after they started questioning him initially, that's also when the van in question went missing.
Yeah, that was really weird.
Yeah.
Because I think that van was key.
Mm.
I really do. I think that would have definitely made a different outcome if they had the van. Because she was seen, there was a witness that saw her get into a van.
Mhm.
And that van was supposedly on his brother's property or something.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden the van disappeared. They didn't know where the van was, or they had it crushed or whatever.
Yeah, eventually a family member ended up saying, "Oh, there was a storm and a tree took out that van," but there was literally no van, like not even like the wreckage. So without being able to say like, "Oh yeah, it was crushed and then it was taken here to like a junkyard," or you know what I mean, like anything like that, there was just like literally the van just like was gone. So that was a little bit suspect and suspicious, I would think.
Now they brought that up, or they didn't in the second trial.
In the second trial,
Bring
for
that
some
up.
reason, right? It was interesting. I don't know why they weren't allowed. There had to have been reasons.
Was it because back in 1988, didn't the father technically own the van?
I think so.
Yep. I think it was like a 3-generation van or something like that they had said, like 3 generations of it, including his father. Yep.
Yeah, so that's
But
what
he
I'm
was known to use that van a lot.
Mhm.
Another thing I thought was weird was you cannot find any pictures of this man in his 20s, 30s, or 40s, or even 50s. The only picture that Murder, She Wrote found was his high school picture and a picture of him when he was in the when he worked at the correctional center. That was it. There's no other pictures of him, which I just find that so weird.
Yeah. I find that weird too. Yeah, that is odd. I don't know why. I don't know why.
You know what? That is kind of common. We have found that with any suspects that were the
that's what I was
Connecticut
saying.
Valley, people that are in their 30s or 40s back in the 80s. It seems to be like you can find high school pictures and then possibly something of them later in life, but
Didn't have cell phones back then. I guess was a big difference.
Yeah, I guess it was a little bit harder to capture pictures, right? Because you didn't have that immediate, like you were saying, cell phone access. But yeah, no, it is odd.
you know somebody's got hard copies of photos out there.
Mhm. And you would think, based off of the interactions that they initially had when they were investigating the family, so there was a little bit of back and forth blame between him and his brother,
Yeah.
Timothy. So you would think, especially as they were questioning from within the family, I'm not saying that his family, turned on him by any means, but there weren't like fantastic things to say about Marvin.
No.
Even from his family's perspective, they certainly weren't placing any sort of blame on him, like not knowing, but they were also like, oh, he was just kind of like a mean old man that used to yell at the kids, and so he went through 4 marriages, had 2 children, was estranged from them, so you would think that, basically my thought process with that, Drew, was you would think that the family would actually offer up some pictures too of, some pictures have to actually exist of him, unless he never let his picture be taken.
It's possible too. For reasons.
Or reasons.
For reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Well, bottom line, I'm very disappointed with the outcome.
Yeah.
Although, so if you were to put yourself in the shoes of a jury member, you're sitting there and you're listening to all the information that the prosecution is bringing forward. You have this DNA profile, which today, if you hear we got a DNA profile, you're like, oh, it's a slam dunk.
Mhm.
It's got to be that one person. That's it.
Yep.
DNA is specific to one person. It can't be, multi-familiar or genes, strains.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's
And if you're sitting there as a jury member and you're like, okay, I'm hearing DNA and there's this other circumstantial evidence, but you got the DNA. However, when the defense comes forward and says, actually, that DNA could belong to over 150 people just in this area, and that's assuming that the person is from the area.
Mhm.
It's not from the area, then that pool jumps drastically from the 150 people. And you do sit there and go, okay, did you look into any of the other 150 names?
yeah.
No, we just focused on this one person. Okay, well, that's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, Jane, I do actually have a question for you. Let's flip the script and say that this is the Connecticut River Valley case. They bring forward somebody, DNA profile. They found the DNA that was under your fingertips. However, everything plays out like it does in this case. And they say, we found the person. It was this person, according to the DNA profile. But then you find out that it actually could have been a couple of hundred people, according to that DNA profile. Now, you definitely want a resolution to this case, but would you want the district attorney or the DA's office to move forward with the prosecution in the hopes that the jury would actually convict the person? Or do you want even more solid evidence? Because I know you've been very hesitant with the identity, looking at pictures and identifying, because you want to make sure that it is the person. You don't want anybody to be arrested that shouldn't be. Do you feel that it was rushed, or do you feel like it was the right person? They brought forward the right information. This guy, McClendon, just had a phenomenal defense lawyer.
Just by that DNA alone, no. I wouldn't feel comfortable with that. But I do feel like the prosecution did not do enough. They had a lot to work with, but yet they just focused on one thing. I feel like that had they put a little bit more time, done a little bit more, testing and, with the tire tracks and the footprint. And I definitely think that they could have done more. But like you said, they solely focused on that DNA. I would not feel comfortable with them going forward with just that. If I knew that that's all that they were going forward with the case, I would not feel comfortable with that. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why it's I know that the outcome certainly wasn't anything that Melissa's family or her friends wanted
No.
to hear, and they were shocked and devastated, but I certainly don't actually blame the jury either based off of
Oh,
what was
not at
brought
all.
up.
That was my next question was, Jane, if you were in this position, if you're in the family, the position of Melissa Tremblay's family, how would you feel? Would you feel like, fuck, we lost our chance? Or would you be a little irritated at the prosecution? Or would you be irritated at the jury members for not prosecuting in what you feel is the right person?
With what the jury had to hear, especially from the defense and the prosecution, they had enough reasonable doubt.
Mhm.
Obviously, the prosecution could have done better.
Mhm.
Who would I be upset with? The prosecution. It's their job to have the evidence, show the evidence. It's their job to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yes.
And they obviously didn't do that. With what the jury saw, I guess I don't blame them. I mean, they did not have much to convict on.
Mhm.
But yeah, my heart goes out to that family because they were really, really looking for some answers. And unfortunately, after the trial, especially the second trial, they've got no answers. I still feel like he's 100% guilty. I just feel like he got away with murder. He had a good defense. And I guess when you have good defense and a lousy prosecutor that's not fully doing their job 100%, that's the outcome you're going to get.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because even at the end of Kristen's last episode about this in talking about the trials, she brings up a really fantastic point that if she were actually the law enforcement and prosecutors now, right? Because the family is going back to their advocates and law enforcement and saying, "Okay, well, what now?"
Yeah.
And their only response is, "Well, all evidence points to him."
Yeah.
Well, now he's been tried and acquitted. So what now? What are you going to do now? I really loved Kristen's suggestion of what they should do is they should go back to all the evidence that actually wasn't used and do their diligence and fully actually prove
Yeah.
that they did their due diligence.
They
However,
can't
they can't
retry
try it.
him.
Right.
They can't retry him, but they can go through everything, find real solid evidence, and then go to media and say, look, yes, he was found not guilty, but this is the absolute evidence that we have to find him
Right.
that he did it.
Yep. I just don't think that the state would allow and or pay for law enforcement to actually put time and resources into doing that. That's all.
And because it could lead to a chance that they're wrong.
True. Ego
It does.
comes into play.
There you go.
Ego with freaking law enforcement, I tell you.
It just, I'm so frustrated with this because one of the reasons why I'm frustrated is now we're going back to New Hampshire and look at Trish Haynes' case. There is so much more evidence in Trish Haynes' case than there was in Melissa Tremblay's case.
Yep.
I think prosecution rushed to try to not charge, but bring it to trial, McClendon. But we can't even get New Hampshire to arrest and charge Trish Haynes' killer or killers.
Yeah.
And there's more evidence in that case than it is this one. What is the problem with New Hampshire's prosecution? I don't get it.
Yeah.
Well, there's still valuable assets to rat on people.
Yeah. That's exactly what it has to inevitably turn out to, based off of the feedback from the family with how many people that they have tried to put in contact with law enforcement, and law enforcement won't even, like, physical evidence, go and collect this, go and speak to this person, go and do that, and they won't do it.
They've had so many witnesses come forward.
Yeah. And with the rap sheets of the individuals that are responsible for Trish Haynes, you have to draw some sort of logical conclusion that the only reason why they're not being charged for Trish Haynes' murder is because they are informants. My opinion.
Yeah. It's just frustrating to me.
Yeah.
Because my heart goes out to Trish Haynes' family and they would love to see a trial.
Yeah.
And prosecution won't give it to them.
Nope.
But prosecution down in Mass for this trial had less, but they did not hesitate to move forward with his trial. So unfortunately, the family has a lot of answers, but yet they don't have answers. They don't see justice.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Melissa still has not seen justice either.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately.
So our hearts definitely go out to her family, her friends, all those that were, really shocked with the results of the second trial. Wish we had a happier
Yeah.
resolution to report, but unfortunately, we don't. So technically, her case is still unsolved.
Yeah. So Melissa's case remains unsolved still. Family still has no answers. They're not seeing justice, unfortunately. So thank you for listening to Invisible Tears. Until next time, stay safe.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Invisible Tears. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast to hear all future episodes. Click into our link tree too in the episode description to find and follow us on all our social medias. And it also links to our website, invisible-tears.com, where you can keep current on any events that may be coming up, read more about Jane and the team, and read more about all the Connecticut River Valley unsolved cases. Evil may exist in this world, but we will not let it win. See you next episode.